A healthy movement looks like pretty much any other movement, a little bit messy, unfortunately, but no, in seriousness, an average size is about 100 to 200 grams, so that's going to be, without being too graphic about it, about that. Fairly solid, but not hardened form, so sort of semi-solid is a decent way of putting it. And I hate to say this, but a nice even brown colour. Unfortunately, pretty much all feces is brown. Some can be dark and light, but something kind of medium in the middle. Often enough, I would think, is pretty much every day. Once a day is average. That means everything's ticking along quite nicely. Any more than that, mildly, say a couple of times a day, probably isn't too much of an issue. But if things go to kind of 4 or 5 times per day, that's probably getting towards mild diarrhea. On the contrary, some people have very slow transit times. That means transit time means how long it takes diet from one end through to the other. So some people go kind of every other day, but I would say if it gets to 1 in 5 days, that probably needs something to speed it up a little bit. But typically, anybody who's going, say, usually once a day or at the most twice a day or once every other day, that's absolutely fine and normal. The main worry for feces is the detection of blood. Most gut diseases have a blood involvement, and those can be quite nasty diseases potentially. They could also be something quite mild or something easily dealt with. But the presence of blood usually is an indicator that something ought to be looked at. As I said, that doesn't necessarily mean one is ill, but you should have it checked out. Having said that, it is slightly more complicated because one very common gut problem, irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS to give it its short name, is not characterised by blood. It's pretty much the only one where there's no blood in the stools. The main symptoms of IBS are unpredictable attacks of diarrhoea, or constipation, or alternating, and so there are categories of IBS called D-IBS, C-IBS, and alternately A for alternating IBS. So some people have the diarrhea form, some have the constipated, and some alternate between the two. And it's a disorder which is very, very common, especially in the UK. It's said to affect about 20 to 25% of people. It's not life-threatening, but obviously it's life-compromising, because if your bowels aren't behaving themselves, you don't feel great. Now, in our gut, we've got trillions and trillions of bacteria. Some of them are negative or harmful, some of them are positive, and some sit in the middle. And what pro and prebiotic supplements aim to do is to fortify the good guys, or the beneficial ones, at the expense of the others.